Namco has been in the business of either manufacturing or creating arcade games for more than 4 decades, dating all the way back to the late 1970s. Galaxian is probably the more well-known of the late 1970s releases, a game that takes inspiration from Taito Space Invaders, but is different in that the invaders will actually dive bomb towards you instead of just making their way down toward the bottom of the screen. There was also some strategy involved in terms of shooting boss ships when they're diving at you to net the most amount of points. Galaxian in turn begat Galaga, the shirt that I'm wearing, probably my favorite Namco game of all time, where there's a bit more strategy involved, where you can allow your ship to be captured by a boss Galaga in a capture beam, and then shoot down that boss Galaga without shooting your ship in order to get 2 ships firing at the same time. That changes the game completely. There are some strategies in terms of high scores. It is a game that took me years to get somewhat decent at, and these days I can hold my own okay. I can rack up 100,000 or 200,000 points when I visit arcades today. But back when I was a kid, back in the 80s, that wasn't happening. When we fast forward from the 80s to the 90s, thanks to the advent of the PlayStation, the Saturn, and the Nintendo 64, technology had advanced enough where we would be seeing something called emulation, which would fool these consoles into thinking that they were the actual arcade machines themselves and running the actual code that the arcade machines ran. So much so that when you started these games at times, there were options where you could actually get the boot up screens, the same you would see if an arcade operator was turning on an arcade machine for the first time that morning or that day. And I always thought that was pretty fascinating. The first one of these emulation compilations, if you will, that I owned was Williams Arcade's Greatest Hits. This guy right here. This is the jewel case variant of the release. There's also a long box variant of this, which was released first, and that's the one that I used to have, but I foolishly traded it in many, many years ago. This has some heavy hitters on it for Williams. We're talking about Defender, Defender 2, which is also known as Stargate back in the day, Joust, Robotron 2084, which is fantastic, one of Eugene Jarvis's best, and Sinistar, which featured voice which scared the heck out of you when you heard it. Run, 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 or I hunger. Just if you've ever played the game or heard the voices, you understand how creepy it was and how really cool it was back in the 80s to hear a game yelling at you like that. Now, Namco did the same kind of thing that Williams did with its Namco Museum series, and this is Volume 1 right here. This is an open copy. It's a copy that I have, and this is a first-run Black Label copy. This has 7 games on it, which was a great start, and these were heavy hitters too. The original Pac-Man is on here, Galaga is on here, which of course meant I had to have it. Pole Position is on here, Rally X and New Rally X are on here, Bosconian, which is a lesser-known but very good arcade game, is also on here, as well as a game called Toy Pop, which I had never played in arcades. This was the first time that I had played it. Now, Namco Museum took a slightly different approach than Williams did in that it set it up just like a museum. You would walk from wing to wing. Each game would have its own wing in the museum. You could check out displays, flyers. You could look at the actual PCB for each game. You could get hints for each game. And then you could go in to a special room and play that particular arcade game. I love the way this was set up. It was set up in a first-person perspective, so it was like you were walking in the museum. Not to mention the fact that the game tracked a bunch of different statistics. So if you're a numbers geek like me, seeing what the average time of each credit was or how many times you died, things like that, it was really, really cool. And this was the first of 5 volumes for the original PlayStation, and I own all but one. Volume 5 is prohibitively expensive. We're talking about well over $100 to get, and that's loose. That's not even a complete version of the game. But I do have the other 4, and they are all really good, although 1 and the game that I'm about to open for you are probably the more popular of the 4. So, let's get to brass tacks. Let us start opening some sealed games. After all, that's what the series is about. We have here a sealed Greatest Hits copy of Namco Museum Volume 3. Now, yes, this is a greatest hits version. This isn't an original Black Label version because those are kind of crazy expensive. I found this for $10 at Retro World Expo at the end of September. This has some heavy hitters on it as well. Miss Pac-Man, Dig Dug, Galaxian, and Pole Position 2 are all on here, as well as Fozon and the Tower of Druaga. And Dig Dug is huge. Dig Dug is one of the heavy hitters from that period. So as we take a look at the back, yes, that is a Goodwill sticker on there. This was originally $3, so it got priced up over time, but I was fine paying $10 for this. Actually, I paid a little bit less because I bought a bunch of sealed games from one particular exhibitor, so I got a little bit of a deal. Turn your home into an arcade with 6 classic hits. Namco Museum Volume 3 offers up the most exciting titles found in our massive arcade archives. Galaxian, Miss Pac-Man, Pole Position, Dig Dug, Fozon, and the Tower of Druaga. Pole Position 2, I should say. All preserved in the Namco time capsule. You can enjoy them today on the PlayStation game console. You can get an education at the arcade. Each game has its own room, displaying the artifacts arcade fans have loved to absorb. See the original arcade marquees, motherboard, marketing materials, and character graphics. All the options at no extra charge. Become a real arcade operator without wearing the tool belt and overalls. By the way, they really didn't wear those. Those were pretty much stored in the back room, but whatever. Control game difficulty, the number of lives a player starts with, extra lives, etc., simply by adjusting each game's dip switch, and that's what arcade operators did. They could adjust how difficult or how easy an arcade game was just by utilizing those dip switches on the inside of the hardware. You're holding the genuine arcade article. You get all the graphics, sounds, and gameplay of the original coin-op hits, the exact arcade translations, authentic in every detail. So this is a greatest hits version. You can tell by the green stripe on the side. I do have to say I'm not as much of a greatest hits snob as some collectors are. As long as I own the game, I'm happy about that. I do try and get Black Label or first run releases for this show, but these releases, especially being arcade games, they tend to run pretty expensive. And for the purposes of this episode, because I have 2 more games to open for you, I figured it would be okay. So let's go ahead, without further ado, let's get this open and take a look at what's on the inside. Let's go ahead and open this up, take the shrink wrap off. This is my favorite part. And we're going to just kind of rip that right off of there just like that. And we're going to see if we can get the ID label off. This video is going to run a little bit long as I have 2 more of these that I'm going to open for you in this particular episode. So bear with me. So we'll take that off. When we open this up, now this is a greatest hits title, so you're not going to get the same kind of artwork that you did in the original release. This is more plain. As we take a look at the disc art, there is Namco Museum Volume 3. It's in black with the M for the 3rd letter in the title. Also on the inside of this, pretty interestingly, you have a Tower of Druaga hint book, which is right here, which shows you the basic layouts of the maps as well as some hints as to how to play the game well. Now remember, this was an arcade game, so we didn't have this at the time, so if you're playing the Tower of Druaga, you were figuring this stuff out on your own. So this is a nice little bonus that Namco has included, not to mention the fact that you also have an advertisement for all 5 of the Namco Museum volumes, N, A, M, C, and O, as well as a list of the games that each includes. In addition, we do have our instruction manual, which we'll take out and look at. The back of the manual does have a list of all the games on the disc. This is going to be in black and white. So it's not going to be in color, but that's okay. This also shows you how old it is. Notice that the controller is the digital setup. There were no analog sticks yet when this had originally come out. There are some interesting things to look at for sure. It shows you things like such as... wow, I sound like Miss South Carolina. It shows you things like the different wings of the museum, some other features you can find inside the museum. There are different floors as well. And then when we get into the brass tacks, it talks about each game as well as how to play each. Now, the cool thing about arcade games like this, for the most part, with the exception of course, of Tower of Druaga, which is a bit more complex, is that a lot of these you don't need the instructions for. You can pretty much figure out how to play them on your own. Miss Pac-Man is just avoiding the ghosts while eating all of the dots. Dig Dug is killing all of the monsters before they kill you. Galaxian is shooting down all the enemies, and Pole Position 2 is finishing a race. It is very simple and easy to play, and that is the wonder of arcade games. They weren't hard to figure out how to play originally, and the early difficulty made it easy to get into, but the games would gradually ramp up in difficulty and test your skill before very long. And of course, being arcade games, they wanted the games to end quickly, so you would keep popping in quarters or tokens. So this is Namco Museum Volume 3. This is the second of the two more popular Namco Museum games, the other I showed you being Namco Museum Volume 1. Again, this ran me $10. You can usually find copies of this for about that price. And if you own an original PlayStation, I highly recommend these because you're getting multiple games in the package, and they are still a lot of fun to play today, just like they were back when they were new. When we move to the PlayStation 2, the compilations of emulations continued. We saw, as a matter of fact, I've done openings for Midway Arcade Treasures and Capcom's arcade games as well. Namco had its own. The first was Namco Museum, and that was a little bit disappointing. While they were kind of sort of emulations, they were also a little bit different than their arcade counterparts. This, however, is much closer to the original arcade games. There are more arcade games here, and it's set up in such a nice package that it's just a lot of fun to play. This was only released in the Greatest Hits version, by the way, so there isn't a black label version. We are talking about Namco Museum 50th Anniversary. Yes, this guy right here. There are a ton of games on here, 14, so there is more than double what we have on Namco Museum Volume 3. And again, we have heavy hitters here. We have Pac-Man, Miss Pac-Man, Galaga, Galaxian, Dig Dug, Rally X, Pole Position 2, Xevious, Dragon Spirit, which is a really fun shooter, Bosconian, Rolling Thunder, Mappy, and Sky Kid. And oh, by the way, there are two other hidden games that you can unlock as well. This was released in 2005, by the way. The Ultimate Arcade Collection, no quarters required. It's party time. Namco celebrates 50 years of bringing you the greatest games on the planet by releasing the biggest compilation of all-star arcade classics. Namco as a company has been around for 50 years, by the way, at this point, not the arcade games per se. Namco Museum 50th Anniversary features 14 of the most treasured Namco original games in arcade history. Relive your arcade years and rock out to a cool 80s soundtrack that takes you back to the glory days of arcade gaming, and this time, leave your quarters at home. Now, the soundtrack only plays when you're walking around or when you're maneuvering in the virtual arcade and not while the games are playing. So this is a little bit different than Activision Anthology, which played the music throughout. This game does not do that. This game only requires 80 kilobytes of memory on your PS2 memory card. I do highly recommend using a memory card because that's how your high scores are saved. I do have a brand new pair of scissors right here, so we're going to go ahead and we're going to open this up. By the way, this is the back of the package. I paid less than $20 for this when I bought it. All right, let's get this open. All right, there we go. There isn't an ID label because this is Greatest Hits, and it was 2005. This is when the ID labels are starting to go away. When we open up the disc, oh, I do love this. So the instruction manual and the disc pretty much match up. And we're going to take a look at the instruction manual here because the instruction manual is pretty healthy in terms of size. In fact, it is 36 pages in length. On the back of the manual, there's an advertisement for Pac-Man World 3. Boy, the Pac-Man World games are a lot of fun, to be honest. They take Pac-Man into the world of platform gaming while keeping the same general Pac-Man theme. Pac-Man World and Pac-Man World 2 are my favorites. Pac-Man World 3, I think, stretches the theme just a little bit thin. When we open up the manual, and it is in color, a 2005 manual that's in full color, if you can believe that. And when we take a look, again, it lists all the games that are available. It shows you how to play each game as well. Here is a very brief how to play Pac-Man list. I want to see if it talks about the hidden games here. Let's see. Mappy, Rolling Thunder, Bosconian, Pole Position. Is it? So it doesn't say, but there are two. I believe the two hidden games here, I think, are Galaga 88 and Pac-Mania. Pac-Mania is a lot of fun to play as well. This is just a fantastic package. It doesn't cost very much at all. This, if you're talking about the Namco Museum series and the PS2, is the better way to go than the original Namco Museum release. Even though the Namco Museum release also has arranged versions of Pac-Man and Dig Dug and Galaga, this is better for purists, I think, and it's a really solid setup. Namco did a nice job with this. I'll take a look here. I don't think that the credits are in here for music in the game. Unfortunately, they are not listed, but they are 80s tunes. So if you like 80s classic 80s tunes like I do, again, this is the way to go. If you're thinking about arcade emulation or classic game emulation compilations, this belongs in your collection along with Activision Anthology and with the Midway Arcade Treasures series and with Capcom's games as well. It's really worth the money, and I highly recommend it. So this was 2005. And I'm so glad to have this because I bought it used, and while it's in good shape, it's not as in good shape, obviously, as a brand new copy. All right, so last one. And we're going all the way up to the Wii now. Now, for the Wii, we have Namco Museum Megamix, which has 24 games in here. Now, this does also do some Wii-related things, and we'll get there as we go. Classic just got cooler, this promises. Namco Museum Megamix brings 6 remixed classics home with fresh new graphics, gameplay, and fun Pac-Man elements. Now, I have not played this very much. I own a copy of it, but honestly, I haven't gotten around to playing it much, so I don't know a lot about it. Feeling a bit nostalgic? Get your fix with 18 classic arcade hits, including the original Pac-Man, Galaga, Dig Dug, and Xevious. Also included here, Grobda, Bosconian, Galaxian, Rally X, Dig Dug 2, which is something we had not seen, New Rally X, Pac-Mania, Galaga, King and Balloon, another one that we have not seen, Gaplus, which is a game that is in the original Namco Museum series for the PlayStation. I think it's either Volume 2 or 4. Mappy, Dig Dug, Super Pac-Man, another debut, Pac and Pal, Dig Dug, Xevious, QDQ, and Motos. Those are all here. Not to mention the fact we have remixes of Galaga, Grobda, and Rally X. So there's a lot to unpack here. It is a nice package. You can use your original or your Pro controller, or you can use the Wii remote with Nunchuck. You can see that right up there. Let's go ahead and open this up and take a look at what the package has in store. This isn't very expensive either, and there are two versions of this. There was a Namco Museum remix, I think, and then there was Megamix. This was released later, and this is the definitive version, if you want to call it that. I think this has more games in it. So when we open this up, and I really do need to make some time to try this on the Wii, because this is a really good package, I think. There we go. All right. When we open this up, we see the disc with Pac-Man on it in a purple-ish color, as well as the instruction manual. This may be a re-release because we have the recyclable package, but that's okay. The instruction manual is in black and white, so it's not in color like the last one, and it is very slim. It's only 11 pages in length, and it also has French instructions in here as well. And it really doesn't say a lot, so if you want to figure out how to play those games, you've got to read the instructions within the games themselves. It does talk about using the classic controller, however, or the Pro controller, which is the later version of that. Talks about the museum hub, where you're going to be using Pac-Man to move around. Carnival Arcade, this is new. The fun isn't over yet, it's just beginning. In addition to the 6 Namco Museum Megamix games, you'll find a large collection of classic arcade games to play in the Carnival Arcade. Oh, okay. You can find and enter the Carnival Arcade by rolling up the red carpet into the museum hub. Move Pac-Man in front of the arcade game you would like to play, and follow the on-screen directions to learn how to control each individual game. Depending on which game you pick, you may use the Wii Remote, Nunchuck, or the classic controller. For multiplayer play, connect a second controller for the second player to use. So unfortunately, by this time, and this is 2010, instruction manuals are beginning to get pretty thin, and a lot of the in-game instructions you'd find actually in the games themselves. I do like this package. I don't think it's quite as thorough as the Namco Museum Virtual Arcade Collection, which is for the Xbox 360, which is very good. But this is still, if you have a Wii, this is a great way to play some of Namco's classic games and to play some that we really didn't see very much outside of arcades. So it's a pretty solid pickup if you can find it. Arcade compilations, we just don't see them very much anymore. Outside of like the SNK Anniversary Collection, a lot of these we have to get piecemeal today. But back in the days of the Wii or the PlayStation 2 or even the original PlayStation, we were lucky enough to have compilations where we would have multiple arcade games on one disc or on one cartridge. Those were fantastic days, and perhaps the best part of that is that you didn't have to pay quarters to be able to play these games. You could play them over and over and over again to be able to beat your own high scores or to practice so that if you were to see these games in arcades, you could play even better. That's one of the ways that I improved in Galaga, to be perfectly honest. And you could just play on your own. You could crank up your stereo at home or put headphones on and sit in the comfort of your own home in your favorite gaming chair or on your bed and just enjoy the games for what they are. And arcade games don't require a lot of setup. They don't require a lot of story. All they require is a little bit of time and a lot of skill. And they're a lot of fun to play even today. As always, thank you very much for watching this episode of Unsealed. I really do appreciate it. Until the next time, my friends, take care of yourselves and each other, and we'll see you next time.